I watched the orthopedic saw scream through my daughter Violet's plaster cast, and the moment that white shell cracked open, I saw the truth Harper swore was just a bad dream. Purple-yellow bruises wrapped around my little girl's forearm like a second skin, each one a fingerprint of the lie I'd been forced to swallow. For clean fractures, the doctor had said. For breaks in the arm of an 8-year-old who supposedly fell off playground equipment. But bruises like these don't come from monkey bars. They come from hands that grip too hard and twist too far. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and secrets, that cold chemical smell that tries to hide what people don't want to admit. Dr. Felix, this young orthopedic surgeon with tired eyes, kept his voice steady as the saw blades spun through the cast. Almost there, Violet. You're being so brave. My daughter sat on the exam table, her small body swallowed by a faded hospital gown, her eyes fixed on the wall like she was somewhere else. Somewhere safer. Her left arm, the one they'd plastered 6 weeks ago, looked impossibly small sticking out from her sleeve. The cast was supposed to come off today. We were supposed to get ice cream after. That was the deal. That was the promise. But promises break when adults decide their version of truth matters more than what actually happened. I stood against the wall, my military training keeping me still even as my inside screamed. 10 years in special forces teaches you how to hold yourself together when everything is falling apart. You learn to read a room, to catch the micro expressions, the way someone's jaw tightens when they're lying, the way their eyes dart left. Harper stood by the window, her arms crossed so tight I could see her knuckles white through her sweater. My ex-wife. The woman who used to send me care packages in Afghanistan with Violet's crayon drawings and cookies that tasted like home. Now she couldn't look at me, couldn't look at her own daughter. Her phone kept buzzing in her pocket, and every vibration made her flinch. Harper, I said, keeping my voice low. Where's Ryder? She didn't turn. He's parking. Traffic. The lie sat between us like a third person. Ryder's truck had been in the lot when I arrived. I'd seen it. Shiny red pickup, the one he bought with money I still couldn't figure out where it came from. The one he used to take Violet to soccer practice. The one that had a small handprint in the dust on the tailgate last time I picked her up. I'd asked about it. Harper said Violet was just being a kid, leaving prints everywhere. Kids don't leave prints like that. Not when they're flinching away from the vehicle like it's got teeth. The saw stopped. Dr. Felix set it down, his movements careful, deliberate. He started peeling back the cast layers, and I saw his face change. Just a flicker. A tightening around the eyes that I'd seen in men about to lose their composure. Violet, honey, can you tell me again how you fell? Violet's voice was smaller than I remembered. I told you. The slide. The tall slide at the park. A pause. The kind of pause that holds 1,000 truths. Yeah. Dr. Felix looked at me, then at Harper, then back at the arm he was uncovering. Mrs. Chun, Mr. Chun, Reyes, I corrected automatically. Dominic Reyes. We're divorced. Mr. Reyes. Dr. Felix's voice dropped. These bruise patterns. They're not consistent with a fall. They're consistent with a twisting force. A grip. He pointed with his pen at a series of marks that made my stomach drop. See these? These are finger-shaped. And they're old. Different healing stages. The room got very quiet. Harper's phone buzzed again. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. I need to take this. Harper, I started. It's work, she snapped, but her voice cracked. She stepped into the hallway, her back to us, phone pressed to her ear. Dr. Felix waited until the door clicked shut. Mr. Reyes, I have to ask. Has Violet been around anyone who might have handled her roughly? My throat was sandpaper. Her mother's boyfriend. Ryder. He's been in the picture about a year. Have you noticed any behavioral changes? I had to lean against the wall. The memories came like flashbangs. Violet stopping mid-sentence when Ryder walked into the room. The way she stopped asking for hugs. The nightmares that started 3 months ago. The bedwetting. The way she'd cling to me during custody drop-offs, her small fingers digging into my neck like she was drowning. Yeah, I managed. A few. I'm required to report this to Child Protective Services, Dr. Felix said gently. But I want you to know, if something happened, if she's in danger, you need to get her out of that house. The door opened. Harper came back in, her face flushed, eyes red-rimmed. Ryder's not coming. He had an emergency at work. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Can we just finish this? I need to get Violet home. Home. The word tasted like poison. Dr. Felix finished removing the cast. Violet's arm looked thin, pale, wrong. The bruises were worse in the fluorescent light, a roadmap of violence I hadn't been there to stop. I knelt beside my daughter, my combat knees cracking. Hey, Bug. Does it hurt? She shook her head. But her eyes were screaming. Can you move your fingers for me? Dr. Felix asked. Violet wiggled them. The movement was stiff, careful, like she was afraid of her own body. Good, Dr. Felix said. That's really good. I'm going to get some paperwork. We'll need to schedule physical therapy. He stood, gave me a look that said everything he couldn't say out loud. Then he left. Harper immediately started gathering Violet's things. Let's go. I don't want to be late for her appointment. What appointment? I asked. Just a follow-up. With her pediatrician. Harper. I stepped between her and the door. Why is Ryder really not here? Don't start, Dominic. Not today. Did he do this? The words came out like a bullet. Did Ryder break her arm? Her face crumpled for a second, then hardened. You're insane. You always think the worst of everyone. Ryder loves Violet. He's been more of a father to her than you ever were, running off to God knows where for months. Don't. My voice was quiet. Dangerous. The voice that made insurgents drop their weapons. Don't you dare turn this on my service. I was providing for my family. You were supposed to protect her. I am protecting her. Harper's voice broke. From you. From your paranoia, your PTSD, The exam room door opened. A nurse stuck her head in. Everything okay in here? Fine, Harper said quickly. We're leaving. But Violet hadn't moved from the table. She sat there, her thin arm cradled against her chest, looking at the floor. And I saw it. The stuffed animal in her backpack. Her favorite. A worn-out elephant named Peanut. Hey, Bug, I said softly. You got Peanut? She nodded, slow. Can I see him? She pulled the elephant out. It was dirty, one eye missing. And there, on its gray fabric, was a small brown stain. Old blood. The kind that seeps into fabric and never really washes out. My combat training kicked in. My breathing steadied. My vision narrowed. Violet, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Did Ryder hurt Peanut? Her bottom lip trembled. She didn't answer. Harper grabbed Violet's hand. We're leaving. Now. But Violet pulled back. Just a little. Just enough. Daddy, she whispered, so quiet I almost didn't hear. Please don't make me go back there. The world stopped. Harper's face went white. And I felt something inside me break and reforge in the same instant. A promise. A vow. The same one I'd made when I held my newborn daughter for the first time, in a hospital room that smelled like hope instead of lies. I looked at my ex-wife, this woman I used to love, and I saw the truth in her eyes. She knew. She'd known all along. Harper, I said, and my voice wasn't angry anymore. It was just empty. Get out of my way. She didn't move. You can't. Watch me. I picked up Violet, cradling her against my chest. She was so light, so small. How had I ever let her go? How had I believed Harper's stories, her texts, her photos of a happy family I wasn't part of? I walked out of that exam room with my broken daughter in my arms, past the nurse's station, past Dr. Felix who nodded once, past the security guard who took one look at my face and stepped aside. I walked out into the cold afternoon air, and I knew exactly what I had to do. The title wasn't just a hook for viewers. It was a promise I was about to keep. I carried Violet out to my truck like I was carrying ordnance. Careful, steady, all my focus on not jarring that fragile arm or the terror tucked somewhere behind her eyes. She didn't ask where we were going. She just buried her face in my shoulder, her good hand clutching the collar of my jacket like she thought I might disappear if she let go. I buckled her into the back seat, slipped her stuffed elephant into her lap, and she stared out the window with that 1,000-yard stare I'd only ever seen on grown men who'd seen too much. This isn't a kidnapping, I told myself as I slid behind the wheel. This is extraction. The hospital shrank in the rearview mirror. My phone buzzed before I hit the first traffic light. Harper, where are you taking her? Harper, Dominic, answer me. Harper, if you don't bring her back right now, I'm calling the police. I let the screen go dark. I'd spent years answering command texts at all hours, dropping everything for whatever mission someone else decided was important. This time, my orders came from the small, shaking girl behind me and the bruised map on her arm. By the time we pulled into my apartment complex, Violet had fallen asleep, her head tilted against the window, peanut pressed to her chest. The building wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, the hum of someone's TV bleeding through faded drywall. But the door had 3 locks and no one inside who would ever lay a hand on her. I parked, sat there for a moment with the engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the soft, uneven sound of my daughter's breathing. I'd missed so many of these quiet sounds. Deployments don't just steal birthdays and holidays. They steal ordinary Tuesday afternoons where you learn what your kid's laugh sounds like when it's not forced for a video call. Hey, Bug, I said softly as I opened her door. We're home for tonight, okay? She blinked awake, confused, then relaxed when she saw it was still me. No panic, no flinch, just a tiny nod that made my chest ache. I helped her out carefully, her injured arm snug against her body, and we climbed the stairs together. Inside, I settled her on my couch and propped her arm with pillows. Cartoons flickered on the TV, the sound low, more for background comfort than actual watching. I made her a grilled cheese the way I remembered she used to like it. Crusts cut off, diagonals, not squares. But when I set the plate down, she just picked at the corner of one triangle. Not hungry? I asked. She shrugged one shoulder. My stomach feels weird. Okay, I said. I didn't push. Kids with real fear don't always eat on schedule. If you want later, it's here. I stepped into the kitchen, out of her direct line of sight, and finally let my body lean against the counter. My hands were shaking. I'd cleared rooms in Kandahar with more calm than I had walking out of that hospital. My phone buzzed again, a different tone. Unknown. You really want to start a war, soldier boy? No name attached, but I didn't need one. The arrogance came through even in black text on a white screen. Ryder. The man who'd slid into my life through a Wi-Fi connection and a smiling selfie 3 years ago. Back then, I'd been sitting in a plywood office on base, sand grinding in my teeth, reading an email from Harper that started with "Don't freak out" and ended with a photo of a guy at our kitchen table. Her kitchen table, I corrected myself even then. A broad-shouldered man in a team jersey, arm wrapped around Violet, both of them grinning at the camera. This is Ryder, she'd written. He's been amazing with Violet while you've been away. I think you'd really like him. I'd stared at the screen a long time. Guys like me are trained to spot threats in the way someone carries their weight, the way they hold their jaw, the tilt of a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. But pixels lie. In that photo, Ryder looked like any other suburban stepdad in training. Clean-shaven, baseball cap turned backward, eyes crinkled at the corners. Violet was missing her 2 front teeth, her smile all gums and joy. I told myself that was what mattered, that she looked happy. The day I met him in person, I was 6 months back from that deployment and still waking up some nights with my heart pounding, hand reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Harper had insisted we all meet on neutral ground, so we picked a chain pizza place with sticky booths and kids running everywhere. He walked in 15 minutes late, like he owned the air around him. Ryder was taller than me by an inch, gym muscles filling out his t-shirt. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who'd never had to check corners before stepping through a doorway. Violet trailed behind him, holding the sleeve of his jacket instead of his hand. Dom, this is Ryder. Harper had said, standing to hug me a little too quickly, like she was afraid I might change my mind and leave. Ryder stuck out his hand. His grip was firm, a shade past polite. The kind of shake that says I want you to know I'm strong without saying it out loud. Good to finally meet you, man, he said. His voice had that smooth, practiced friendliness of someone who'd closed a lot of sales. I've heard a lot about you. Yeah, I asked, watching Violet slide into the booth, pressing herself against the wall like she wanted to disappear into it. Hope some of it was true. He laughed, too loud for the small space. Harper's just worried you'll think I'm trying to replace you. I'm not. I'm just here for Violet, you know? She's an amazing kid. Across the table, Violet kept her eyes on the laminated menu, tracing the pictures of pizza with one finger. When the waitress came to take orders, she whispered, "Cheese, please," then flinched when Ryder corrected her. "Pepperoni, like you always get, right, kiddo?" he said, ruffling her hair. She nodded automatically. I saw the delay, a half-second where she looked like she wanted to say something else, then didn't. I told myself then that it was just adjustment. Divorce was messy. New adults were confusing. I'd spent more time rationalizing away those tiny moments than it would have taken to actually ask my daughter how she felt. Back in my apartment now, I watched Violet on the couch. Her eyes weren't on the TV. They were on the front door. "You're safe here," I said, stepping back into the living room. "No one's coming in without me knowing about it." She nodded, but her shoulders stayed tense. My phone rang, this time an actual call. "Harper." I answered before it woke up every muscle memory in my body. "What are you doing?" she demanded, skipping hello. Her voice was sharp, stretched thin. "You can't just take her like that, Dominic. That's not how custody works." "How it works," I said, keeping my tone level, "is my daughter has bruises in different stages of healing on her arm, and the doctor used the words twisting force and report. I'm not handing her back into that house until someone who doesn't share your last name tells me it's safe." "You're overreacting," she snapped. "Felix is just covering himself. Kids get bruises." She fell. She didn't fall. The words came out harder than I meant. "And you know it." On the other end, there was a pause. Just like in the hospital. Just like before every lie. "If you keep her from me, I will call the police and I will tell them you're unstable. You want them to see your file? Your tours? Your panic attacks? You think that helps you?" There it was. The weapon I always knew she could pull if she wanted. My service record turned into a character attack. "Call whoever you need to," I said quietly. "But remember this. When they ask why a doctor filed a report today, they won't be looking at my arm." I hung up before she could answer. My heart hammered, but my breathing stayed slow. Dealing with Harper was like clearing a minefield you'd helped lay. You knew where some of the explosives were, but not all of them. I sank into the armchair across from the couch, pulled out my phone, and did what I should have done the first time his name showed up in my inbox. I searched. Ryder plus town name, Ryder plus coach, Ryder plus arrest. Nothing obvious popped up. Just social media profiles, gym selfies, shots of him at barbecues with kids climbing on his back, captions about doing anything for my girl, with Harper tagged, and a string of hearts. But even through the filter of carefully curated posts, I saw it now. The way he always stood in the center of the frame. The way Violet was either clinging too close or standing just a little too far away. I clicked on one video I'd skipped before. Ryder filming himself at Violet's soccer game. He was shouting encouragement, the camera shaking as he ran along the sideline. "Come on, Violet, hustle. You're faster than that," he yelled. The words were technically praise. The tone wasn't. When she missed a goal, the camera zoomed in on her face, flushed and upset. He laughed. "Guess someone's not getting ice cream tonight," he joked. Back then, I'd forced a smile when Harper sent it. At least she's got someone there. I'd told my reflection in my bunk's metal wall. On my couch, Violet shifted, pulling her knees up. Peanuts slipped from her fingers and landed on the floor. She jerked like she'd done something wrong. "It's okay," I said quickly, reaching down to grab it. Stuffed animals bounce. That's their job. A tiny, reluctant smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Gone almost as soon as it appeared. Daddy, she said after a quiet stretch. Yeah, bug. When you were gone before. She stared at the TV, but I knew the cartoon meant nothing. Did you ever get in trouble for telling the truth? The question hit harder than any punch. Sometimes, I admitted. Telling the truth can make people mad, especially if they like their lies better. She was silent for a long moment. Then, so soft I had to lean forward to catch it, she said, he told me if I said anything, nobody would believe me anyway. Because he's the grown-up. And I'm just a kid. My hands curled into fists against my knees. Not from a desire to hit anything, but from the effort of not tearing the world down around us. I believe you, I said. Each word steady. Solid. Every single thing you ever tell me. I believe you. Her eyes finally met mine. There it was. Fear. Yes, but something else sparking under it. Hope. My phone vibrated on the table again. A new text, this time from a number I didn't recognize. Unknown. You think you can just walk out with what's mine and there won't be consequences? I stared at the words, at the audacity buried in that one possessive pronoun. What's mine? As if my daughter were a piece of furniture he'd financed. Behind me, the deadbolt on my apartment door suddenly felt like it wasn't enough. Because men who call children mine don't usually stop at threats written on a screen. I set the phone down like it might explode if I held it too long. That one word, mine, kept replaying in my head, like some bad echo from a briefing where command forgot soldiers were people, not equipment. Ryder didn't say Violet. He didn't say her. He said, what's mine? On the couch, my daughter glanced over, catching the way my jaw had locked. Kids know when something is off. Especially kids who've been walking on eggshells for a while. Is that him? She asked quietly. I hated that she didn't have to say his name for me to know who she meant. Yeah, I said. But he doesn't get to decide anything tonight. You do. She watched me for a moment, like she was testing if that could possibly be true. Then she sank back into the cushions, eyes heavy. Within minutes, exhaustion pulled her under. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and started doing the only thing that ever made sense in chaos. I made a plan. Step 1. Talk to someone who wasn't emotionally tangled in this disaster. Someone who'd seen Violet when I wasn't around. By morning, after maybe an hour of drifting in and out on the armchair, I'd already drafted an email to her teacher, Miss Clara. I kept it simple. Asked if she'd noticed any changes in Violet. If there was anything school-related, I should know. It was vague enough not to start a fire, specific enough to let her know I wasn't asking for a reading log. She replied before homeroom. Can you come in after dismissal? Was all it said. That's never a good sign. I called in a favor with an old squad buddy who now worked remote security. He didn't ask many questions when I told him I might need someone to vouch for my stability soon. You kept us alive, he said. I'll keep the paperwork honest. At 3 o'clock, Violet and I walked into her school together. She clung to my hand this time. I try not to read too much into that, but it felt like a verdict. The hallway walls were lined with colorful artwork, glitter, construction paper, smiling stick figures. It should have felt cheerful. It didn't. Ms. Clara's classroom smelled like dry erase markers and kid shampoo. She greeted Violet with a soft smile, then looked at the sling and cast-off bruises now fading yellow. Something in her expression tightened. Hi, Violet, she said gently. Why don't you go pick a book from the reading corner? I need to talk to your dad for a minute, okay? Violet hesitated, then released my hand and crossed the room, moving like she was bracing for someone to call her back. I stepped closer to the teacher's desk. You said you wanted to talk? She exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding this in for weeks. I've been debating whether to contact you directly, she said. I already filed a concern with the counselor, but things move slowly here. I slid down my spine. What kind of concern? She glanced over at Violet, then back at me. Her voice dropped. Her drawings changed. At the beginning of the year, it was all rainbows, friends, you, typical 8-year-old stuff. About 3 months ago, she started drawing scenes. Scenes? Clara opened a drawer and pulled out a folder I recognized from the military. Everything important goes here. She laid a few sheets on the desk, face down, like she was giving me a chance not to look. I flipped them anyway. The first drawing was simple, 3 stick figures. One big, 2 small. The largest figure had long arms wrapped around one of the smaller ones. The arms were colored in dark, heavy strokes. The small figure's mouth was a jagged red line. Above them, in shaky block letters, "Stop it." My throat closed. She drew this when? Right after winter break, Clara said. She told me it was a game they played at home. When I asked who the tall one was, she said, "Mommy's friend." Ryder. Another picture. This time, a house, windows blacked out, a little girl drawn twice. Once inside, once outside, split down the middle by a thick crayon line. On one side, good. On the other, bad. I forced air into my lungs. Why didn't anyone tell me? I tried to talk to Harper first, she admitted. She said Violet was acting out because of the divorce. She asked me not to feed into it. The counselor recommended monitoring, but without a clear disclosure. She shook her head, guilt flickering over her face. I should have pushed harder. I wasn't sure who I was angrier at, Ryder for doing this, Harper for letting it happen, or myself for being so far away in every way that my kid had to use crayons as a flare gun. Across the room, Violet sat in the beanbag chair, pretending to read. Her eyes kept darting to us. Has she ever said she's afraid to go home? I asked. Clara hesitated, then nodded. Last week, she asked if kids ever live at school. Something in my chest cracked open. I gathered the drawings carefully, like evidence. Because that's what they were now. Proof my daughter had been screaming into paper while the adults argued about custody and calendars. As we left the classroom, Violet slipped her hand into mine again. Did I do something wrong? She asked, voice barely audible. I swallowed hard. No, Bug, I said. You did the only thing you could. What I didn't say was the part that burned the most. The people who were supposed to read the signs just hadn't been looking. The next morning, before Violet woke up, I made the call that would either save her or destroy everything I had left. Child Protective Services. A woman with a tired voice on the other end explained the process in neutral tones. Investigation, interviews, home visits, timelines. She took down details with the efficiency of someone who'd heard 10,000 versions of this same story. When I mentioned the school reports, the hospital documentation, the text from Ryder claiming Violet was mine, something in her voice shifted. We'll need to speak with the child, she said. Today, if possible, and we'll conduct a formal investigation within 24 hours. After I hung up, I sat on the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and tried to calculate how many ways this could blow up in my face. Harper would fight it. Ryder would lawyer it up. My military file would be pulled out like a weapon. But there was no going back now. Violet's drawings were in a folder at the school. Her bruises were documented in a hospital system. The truth, finally, was being written down in official places where people couldn't ignore it. Violet shuffled out around 8, still wearing yesterday's clothes, peanut tucked under one arm. I made her waffles, the only breakfast food that didn't require her to hold utensils with her injured hand. She ate in silence, watching me with that careful attention kids develop when they're tracking an adult's mood. The CPS lady is coming today, I told her, keeping my voice steady. She just wants to talk to you. About how things have been. Am I in trouble? Violet asked immediately. No, Bug. You're not in trouble. You never were. She stared at her waffles. Is Mommy going to be mad? There it was. The trap Ryder had built. Make the kid afraid of the truth teller, not the person who broke her bones. Make loyalty feel like survival. Your mom might be upset, I said carefully. But that's not your job to manage. Your job is just to tell the truth. Can you do that? She nodded slowly, but her hands started shaking a little. The social worker, a woman named Eliza with kind eyes and the posture of someone who'd spent years building trust with terrified kids, arrived at 10. She sat on my couch, careful, unhurried, and talked to Violet like she was a person, not a problem to solve. I stayed in the kitchen, far enough away that they had privacy, close enough to hear if Violet needed me. The conversation was quiet. Mostly Violet's voice, in that careful monotone kids use when they're reciting a script they've practiced. I caught fragments. He said if I told nobody would believe me. He held my arm tight and twisted. Mommy said I was lying for attention. By the time Eliza emerged from that conversation, her face had hardened into something professional but furious. "Thank you for calling this in," she said to me, and it sounded like she meant it in a way that went beyond paperwork. "We'll need to visit your ex-wife's home. We'll need to interview the boyfriend. And we'll need to do a full body examination to document all injuries." "He'll fight it," I warned. Ryder's not the type to go quietly. She didn't flinch. Most people aren't. By noon, CPS had filed their report. By 1 o'clock, I'd missed 3 calls from Harper. By 2, her lawyer, a sharp-voiced man named Nathaniel, had sent an email claiming I was interfering with parental rights and filing false reports out of spite. I didn't respond. I just made Violet lunch and tried to pretend my insides weren't vibrating at a frequency that made my teeth ache. That evening, Ryder showed up. I was washing dishes when Violet said, "Daddy, there's a truck outside." I didn't move for a second, just kept my hands in the soapy water, processing the fact that he'd found my address, had the audacity to come here, believed he could walk into my space and take back what he'd never owned. "Stay in your room," I told Violet. "Lock the door. Don't come out until I say." "Daddy, now." She moved, and I heard her footsteps down the hallway, the soft click of her bedroom door. I dried my hands slowly, each motion deliberate, the kind of calm that comes right before violence, or right before you choose not to do it. I'd learned the difference in a desert 12,000 miles away. When I opened the door, Ryder was still outside my apartment, standing between his truck and my door like he was claiming territory. He was bigger than he looked in photos. His shoulders filled a polo shirt the way gym time was his second job. His smile was all confidence, zero warmth. "Dominic," he said, voice smooth as oil. "We need to talk about what's happening here." "No," I said quietly, "we don't. Your ex-wife is upset. Violet's upset. And now there's some busybody social worker asking about bruises that came from her falling off." "She didn't fall," I said. And something in my voice must have cut through his script, because he stopped smiling. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his hand had moved to his truck door. "An exit strategy. Kids get hurt. It happens. You're just trying to turn her against me because Harper chose." "Harper didn't choose you," I interrupted. "She was scared of you. There's a difference." His jaw clenched. For a moment, I saw it. The thing Harper had been living with. The coldness underneath the charm. The machinery of a man who thought the world was a market to be worked. "If you get in the way of this," he said, his voice dropping to something uglier, "there will be consequences. I know people. I have resources. I can make your life very difficult, soldier boy." I stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me. My neighbors peeked out from their windows. "Good. Witnesses." "You're going to leave," I said. "You're not going to contact my daughter. You're not going to contact my ex-wife. And if I see you anywhere near this building again, I'm going to forget I was ever trained to use restraint." He laughed. Actually laughed. But he was backing toward his truck. "You can't protect her forever." "I can try," I said. He climbed into his cab, and I watched him drive away, my hands clenched so tight the nails cut crescents into my palms. He was right about one thing. I couldn't protect her forever, but I could protect her today, and tomorrow, and however many days it took to make sure he never got close enough to break anything else. I went back inside, locked the deadbolt, and called out, "Okay, Bug. It's safe." Violet emerged from her room slowly, eyes wide. "Was that him?" "Yeah." Did he hurt you?" I knelt down to her level. "No. And he's not going to hurt you again. I promise." She looked at me like she was trying to decide if promises meant anything anymore. I couldn't blame her. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of CPS caseworkers visiting Harper's house, Interviewing Ryder, who hired a lawyer immediately and said almost nothing, collecting statements from Ms. Clara and Dr. Felix, and every person who'd ever noticed something was wrong. 3 weeks of Violet living in my apartment, sleeping on my couch most nights because her own bed gave her nightmares, and me sitting in the dark kitchen at 3 in the morning wondering if I was helping or just delaying the inevitable. Then the neighbor, Brooke, called. She was a woman I'd nodded at in the parking lot a few times, mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of person who actually paid attention to what was happening around her instead of scrolling through a phone. She asked to meet me at the coffee shop on the corner, not near the apartments. "I have something," she said, sliding a flash drive across the table between us. Security footage from the night Violet got hurt. My hands didn't shake, but something behind my ribs definitely did. "You already gave this to the police, right?" "I tried," Brooke said quietly. "I gave it to a detective named Logan. He was thorough, took it, documented it, said he'd include it in his file. But then," she paused, stirred her coffee like she was buying time to decide how much to say. "Then I got a call from Ryder's lawyer. He said the footage showed nothing, that I was being vindictive, that if I continued to spread false accusations he'd pursue a defamation suit." "That's intimidation," I said flatly. "Yeah, well, I'm also a single mom. I don't have a lawyer. I don't have the energy to fight." She pushed the drive a little closer. "But I made a backup, because something about the way that lawyer came at me made me think I should. Call it female intuition or whatever." I copied the file to my phone right there, not caring who saw. When I got home, I plugged it into my laptop and watched. The timestamp read 3 months earlier. The angle showed the side of Harper's driveway, the porch, the area where the kids' toys were usually scattered. It was dusk, that gray light where everything looks slightly unreal. Ryder walked into frame with Violet. He had her hand. Not holding, gripping. Her small fingers were white-knuckled. He said something I couldn't hear. She shook her head. Even on the grainy footage, I could see the tension in her shoulders. Then he twisted. Not a yank. Not a pull. A twist. The kind of motion that comes from a specific intention to cause pain. Her whole body rotated with his movement, her arm hyperextending in a way that made my stomach lurch. She screamed. I saw her mouth open, and she fell. He didn't catch her. She hit the edge of the concrete step and crumpled. Ryder stood there for maybe 3 seconds, looking at her like he was assessing damage. Then he picked her up, brushed off her pants, and carried her inside. The whole thing took 17 seconds. I watched it 4 more times. Each time, my hands got colder. I forwarded the file to Eliza, the CPS investigator, with a single line. This appeared after the initial investigation began. Her response came within an hour. "This changes everything. Do not share this with anyone else." I'm escalating. But by the next morning, I got an email from Nathaniel, Ryder's lawyer. It was a masterclass in legal intimidation. "We have become aware that Mr. Reyes has obtained a digital recording through improper channels. Said recording is inadmissible as evidence due to violations of privacy law. Furthermore, Mr. Reyes appears to be coaching his daughter to make false allegations against my client. We are prepared to file a motion to expand custody to our client, with potential restriction of Mr. Reyes's parental access pending psychological evaluation for paranoid ideation and PTSD-related instability." The words hit like cold water. Coaching, false allegations, psychological evaluation. They were flipping the script, making me the villain. I called Morgan, the lawyer who'd offered to help pro bono, and read her the email. "Shit," she said, which was the first time I'd heard her curse. "They're going on offense. They know the video is damaging, so they're preempting it by claiming it's fake or improperly obtained. And they're using your military file against you. Can they do that? Technically, no. But judges are people, and people have biases. A decorated soldier with PTSD who takes his kid in the middle of a custody dispute." She exhaled slowly. "It plays a certain way to certain judges." That afternoon, I picked Violet up from the supervised CPS visit, because yes, The investigation had gotten far enough that her time with Harper was now monitored, and she climbed into the truck with the careful movements of a child who'd learned to make herself smaller. "Did Mommy seem okay?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "She cried," Violet said. "She said it was my fault you were trying to take me away. She said if I kept lying, you'd go to jail and I'd have to live with Ryder forever." The words landed like a punch. Harper wasn't just failing to protect her daughter. She was actively terrorizing her into silence. "That's not how it works," I said, my voice tight. "Your mom is scared and confused right now. That doesn't make what she said true." But Violet was staring out the window, and I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. The simple math children use. If telling the truth means losing both parents, then maybe lying was the only safe choice. A week later, the CPS investigation concluded. Eliza called me with the official determination: substantiated abuse. "We're filing a petition with the court for temporary custody modification and mandated therapy for all parties." It should have felt like a win. Instead, within 48 hours, Nathaniel filed a counterpetition. He claimed the CPS investigation was biased against his client, that the evidence was circumstantial and subject to multiple interpretations, and that my documented history of military PTSD and anger management issues made me an unsuitable primary caregiver. He demanded a full custody trial. The hearing date was set for 6 weeks out. Plenty of time for a good lawyer to make a decorated soldier look like a paranoid abuser trying to weaponize his kid against her stepfather. Plenty of time for Ryder to make sure his version of the story was the one that stuck. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with copies of every piece of evidence I had. The hospital report, the teacher's observations, the CPS findings, the video, and it looked like a lot on paper. But I'd been in enough courtrooms to know that paper doesn't always win. Confidence wins. Narrative wins. The ability to make a judge believe your version of reality wins. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "She's going to recant. Harper's already talking about dropping the allegations if you agree to supervised visitation and therapy. Think about it. Saves everyone from a messy trial." I didn't respond, but I knew what was happening. This was the moment where they tested to see if I'd blink. If I'd accept a compromise that left Ryder in Violet's life, just with watching eyes. A compromise that meant my daughter would spend the rest of her childhood waiting for the next time someone decided she was small enough to hurt. I looked at the video again. Those 17 seconds. "No," I said to the empty kitchen. "Not this time." The court date arrived faster than I expected, like a mortar round with a short fuse. Morgan, the attorney who'd offered to help pro bono, met me in the hallway outside the family court chambers. She was younger than I thought she'd be, maybe 35, with the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing and a briefcase that looked like it had seen its share of ugly fights. "Here's the deal," she said, not wasting time on pleasantries. "Harper's lawyer is going to paint you as a jealous ex with PTSD who can't handle that his wife moved on. They're going to say Violet's injuries were from normal kid stuff, that you're coaching her, that the video is doctored or taken out of context. They'll bring up your deployment record, any disciplinary actions, any counseling you received after your tours. They'll make you look unstable." "And what do?" I asked. "We let Violet speak," Morgan said simply. "Kids' testimony is powerful when it's real. The jury will see it." But Violet wasn't a soldier. She was an 8-year-old who'd learned that telling the truth got her arm broken. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, more like a conference room with a judge's bench. Judge Adrian, a former military prosecutor according to Morgan's research, sat behind the bench with the kind of posture that said he'd seen every lie humanity could invent. Harper sat at the other table with Nathaniel, her lawyer, and Ryder sat behind them in the gallery, dressed in a button-down shirt that made him look like a respectable businessman instead of the man who'd twisted my daughter's arm until it snapped. Violet sat between Morgan and me, her small hands clenched in her lap. She'd been quiet all morning, not asking questions, not crying. That silence worried me more than tears would have. "All rise," The bailiff called, and we stood as Judge Adrian entered. The proceedings started with Nathaniel's opening statement, which was essentially a character assassination dressed up as concern. Your Honor, we're here today because a father who chose his military career over his family is now trying to destroy the stable home his ex-wife has built. Mr. Reyes has a documented history of PTSD, anger management issues, and has been unable to accept that Ms. Harper has found a loving partner who has stepped up as a father figure to Violet. The so-called evidence is a manipulated video obtained illegally, and the child's statements have clearly been coached. Morgan's rebuttal was brief and surgical. Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself. A child with 4 fractures. A video showing the defendant twisting that child's arm. Medical documentation of abuse. And a mother who chose her boyfriend over her daughter's safety. This isn't about jealousy. It's about protection. Then they called their first witness, Harper. She walked to the stand like she was walking to her own execution, all pale skin and trembling hands. Nathaniel led her through a gentle series of questions about how wonderful Ryder was with Violet, how he'd coached her soccer team, helped with homework, been a stabilizing presence during the divorce. And has Mr. Reyes ever expressed hostility toward your new partner? Nathaniel asked. Yes, Harper said, her voice barely audible. He called Ryder a threat and said he was going to handle it. I was afraid of what that meant. I leaned forward, but Morgan's hand on my arm stopped me from saying anything. This was theater, and I wasn't supposed to interrupt the performance. And the night Violet was injured, Nathaniel continued. Can you walk us through what happened? Harper took a breath. We were at the park. Violet was playing on the equipment. Ryder was watching her while I took a phone call. He said she fell from the top of the slide. He brought her to me right away. We took her to the hospital immediately. Did you see her fall? No. But, so you have no independent verification of how she was injured? Harper's eyes flicked to me, then away. No. Nathaniel smiled. Thank you. No further questions. Morgan stood. Ms. Harper, you testified that Mr. Ryder has been a stabilizing presence. Is that why you allowed him to discipline your daughter? Objection, Nathaniel said. Leading. Overruled, Judge Adrian said. Answer the question. Harper shifted in her seat. He helped with discipline, yes. But never anything physical. Never. Morgan walked to her table, pulled out a piece of paper. Your daughter told her therapist that Ryder played discipline games where he would twist her arm until she cried. She said you watched. That's not true, Harper whispered. She said you told her that if she told anyone, you would go away and she'd have to live with Ryder forever. Is that a statement you made? Harper's face crumpled. I was scared. He said if I didn't back him up, he'd leave me. I'd lose everything. The courtroom went silent. Even Nathaniel looked caught off guard. So you chose him over your daughter's safety? Morgan asked quietly. Harper didn't answer. She just started crying, soft, broken sobs that echoed in the small room. Judge Adrian called a recess, and Harper practically ran from the stand, Ryder catching her arm as she passed him. I saw his fingers dig in, just for a second, before she pulled away. Then it was Violet's turn. She walked to the witness stand like she was walking into a lion's den, her small frame swallowed by the big chair. Morgan approached her gently, asking simple questions about school, her favorite subjects, her friends, building rapport. Then, Violet, can you tell us what happened the night your arm got hurt? Violet's eyes found mine. I nodded once, small and steady. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. She tried again. Her breath hitched. Her hands started shaking. Violet, Morgan prompted gently. Violet's voice was a whisper. I can't. Her breathing sped up. Her face went pale. She clutched the edge of the witness stand like she was falling. Violet, are you okay? Judge Adrian asked, leaning forward. She wasn't. Her chest heaved. Her eyes went wide, unfocused. She was having a panic attack, right there, in front of everyone who needed to believe her. Morgan moved to her side, but Nathaniel stood. Your Honor, this is exactly what I was talking about. This child is clearly being coached, and is now having a breakdown because she can't remember the script. This testimony is unreliable. Violet's gasping breaths filled the courtroom. I started to stand, but Morgan's look held me in place. Your Honor, Morgan said, the child is having a medical episode due to trauma. May we have a brief recess? Judge Adrian nodded, but his eyes were on Violet, and they were skeptical. As Morgan helped Violet from the stand, my daughter looked at me one last time. Her expression wasn't fear. It was shame, like she'd failed. And in that moment, I realized the worst part of all of this. Ryder had won the first battle without even being on the stand. He'd made telling the truth feel like losing. The recess lasted 15 minutes, but it felt like 15 hours in a holding pattern where the only thing keeping me from punching a wall was the weight of Violet's hand in mine. She hadn't spoken since the panic attack, just sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, her back against the cold cinder block, staring at her shoes like they held answers. Morgan crouched in front of her. Violet, honey, you didn't do anything wrong. The judge knows that. Everyone knows that. But Violet's silence was its own language, and it was telling us she'd learned a hard lesson. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it just gets you heard in front of an audience. Judge Adrian called us back in. His face gave away nothing, but his eyes kept drifting to Violet with an expression I couldn't read. Sympathy? Skepticism? Exhaustion? Probably all three. Nathaniel stood. Your Honor, given the child's inability to testify, we move to dismiss the petition for custody modification. The evidence is clearly insufficient, and the child is being traumatized by this process. Morgan shot to her feet. Your Honor, the trauma occurred long before this hearing. What you witnessed is the result of abuse, not the cause of it. We have additional evidence that was obtained improperly, Nathaniel interrupted. The video is inadmissible. The child's statements are unreliable. The mother's testimony supports our client's innocence. This is a case of a bitter ex-husband using his daughter as a pawn. Judge Adrian held up a hand. Counsel, I've heard enough posturing. Ms. Morgan, do you have anything concrete that doesn't rely on the child's in-court testimony? Morgan's jaw tightened. We have the video, Your Honor. We have medical records. We have teacher observations. We have circumstantial evidence. Nathaniel cut in again. All of which can be explained by normal childhood accidents and a father who can't accept his ex-wife's new life. I watched Ryder in the gallery. He sat with his arms crossed, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The smile of a man who knew the system well enough to work it. But then the courtroom doors opened, and a woman in a dark suit walked in with a manila folder. She handed it directly to Judge Adrian, who opened it, read the first page, and his entire demeanor changed. Counsel, approach the bench, he said, his voice suddenly sharp. Morgan and Nathaniel moved forward, heads together, voices low. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw Nathaniel's face drain of color. Saw Morgan's shoulders straighten with a kind of victorious tension. Judge Adrian looked up. Mr. Ryder, would you please stand? Ryder's smile faltered. Your Honor, stand. Now. He did, slowly, like a man who knew the ground was about to drop out from under him. You're under arrest for aggravated child abuse, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. The warrant was just issued based on new evidence obtained by Detective Logan from the Financial Crimes Unit. The courtroom erupted. Nathaniel was shouting objections. Harper was crying. Ryder was being cuffed by a bailiff who looked like he'd been waiting for this moment. I didn't understand. Financial crimes? What did money have to do with broken bones? Morgan came back to our table, her face flushed with adrenaline. They found his pattern, she said quietly. Detective Logan wasn't just investigating the abuse. He was investigating Ryder. Turns out our charming boyfriend has been running a scam for years. She explained it fast, her voice low enough that Violet couldn't hear the worst parts. Ryder targeted single mothers with young children. He'd move in, establish himself as the perfect stepdad, then start the abuse, subtle at first, then escalating. But the real genius of his operation was the blackmail. He'd secretly record the mothers in compromising situations or fabricate evidence that made them look neglectful, then use it to control them. If they threatened to leave or report him, he'd threaten to take the kids and the house. Harper wasn't just scared of him, Morgan said. She was trapped. He'd been paying her mortgage with money from a shell corporation, making it look like she was financially dependent on him. But the money was dirty, fraud, identity theft, a whole network of scams. The DA's office has been building a case for months. They just needed a victim brave enough to come forward. I looked at Harper, collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Not for Ryder. For herself. For the cage she'd been living in. Ryder was being let out, still protesting his innocence, when Detective Logan stepped into the courtroom. He caught my eye and nodded once. A soldier's nod. The kind that says we got him. But the victory felt hollow. Because while the system was finally working, my daughter was still sitting next to me, her small hand trembling in mine, and I knew that no amount of justice would ever unbreak what he'd broken in her. They led Ryder out of that courtroom in cuffs, and for a second it felt like the story should end there. Bad guy arrested, judge angry, justice system finally awake. Roll credits. But real life doesn't cut to black just because someone says you're under arrest. There's always more paperwork, more damage, more kids. We were packing up when Detective Logan came over. Up close, he looked even more wrecked than I felt. Creases around his eyes, tie loosened like he'd slept maybe 3 hours the night before. Reyes, he said quietly, glancing at Violet. Mind if we talk for a second? In the hall. I squeezed Violet's shoulder. You okay if Morgan sits with you for a minute? She nodded. Eyes still locked on the empty doorway Ryder had just gone through. In the hallway, Logan didn't waste time. The warrant we just served on Ryder wasn't just for what he did to your daughter. Financial crimes dug up a storage unit in his name. We opened it this morning. My stomach clenched. What was in it? Folders, he said. Dozens. Photos. Videos. Notes. Names. He's been doing this a long time, in different cities. We've got enough to put him away for a good chunk of his life. I should have felt relief. Instead, all I could picture was other little girls with arms in casts, drawing stick figures that nobody wanted to read. So he doesn't get bail? I said. Not with what we've got now. Logan hesitated, then added, there's one more thing. We think there's another kid in danger right now. Different town, couple hours out. The local PD is serving a warrant as we speak. Mom reported him missing 2 days ago, but the financials say Ryder's been paying for a second apartment. We're worried he stashed the boy there to keep leverage over her. I felt the hallway tilt. And you're telling me this because? Because, he said, meeting my eyes. I know what it does to a man to feel helpless while a kid suffers. I figured you might want to know that when we nail the door shut on this guy's life, it's not just for Violet. 2 hours later, I was standing behind a line of uniforms outside a rundown 2-story building in a neighboring town, wondering how the hell I'd gone from family court to another kind of operation. I hadn't asked to go. Logan had. Civilian observer, he called it. Sometimes it helps the paperwork to have a veteran's statement, he told his captain. Maybe that was true. Or maybe he knew I needed to see this through. The hallway smelled like stale cigarettes and old carpet. Apartment 2B's door was closed, blinds drawn. A woman in a faded sweatshirt sat on the stairs, arms wrapped around herself, answering a female officer's questions in a flat voice. I didn't need to ask who she was. I recognized the look, same one I'd seen on Harper's face when everything finally snapped. Logan knocked. Police. Open up. Silence. He tried again, louder. Police. We have a warrant. From inside, faint and muffled, came a sound that turned my blood to ice. Not a word. Not a scream. Just a small, choked sob. The sound of a kid who'd learned being quiet was safer, but couldn't quite hold it in. Logan met my eyes. Doors solid. If he barricaded it, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. Every breaching drill I'd ever done flashed through my head. Angles, hinges, points of weakness. My boots moved before my brain caught up. Reyes, Logan started. I've got it, I said. I stepped back, judged the frame. Not metal. Older wood. Lock plate already stressed. Whoever installed it hadn't cared about much more than looks. Good. The first kick was to test. Ball of my foot, just above the lock. The door shuddered, frame splintering. Inside, the sob cut off into a sharp inhale. Kid. I called, loud enough to carry through, steady as I could make it. My name's Dominic. I'm here with the police. We're getting you out, okay? No answer. But I heard movement. A small scrape, like someone backing away from the door. The second kick was everything. Hips, shoulders, all that old training I'd promised myself I'd never use again outside a war zone. The jamb cracked, the deadbolt tore out of the molding, and the door flew inward, slamming against the wall with a bang that echoed down the hallway. The room inside was dim, curtains drawn, air heavy with sweat and something sour. In the corner, on a stained mattress on the floor, sat a boy maybe 7 years old. Wrists zip-tied in front of him, eyes huge. He flinched when the door hit, then froze when he saw the uniforms behind me. You hurt? I asked, not stepping over the threshold yet. This wasn't my scene. I was just the guy who opened it. He shook his head too fast. Classic yes disguised as no. A female officer moved past me, voice gentle. Hey, buddy. I'm Tessa. Can I come sit with you? I stepped back into the hall as she went in, my heart pounding harder than it had on half my missions. Logan clapped a hand on my shoulder. Door kicker, he said. Guess once you've got the training. It's not about the door, I said, staring at the boy. It's about who finally walks through it. On the drive home, I kept seeing that kid's face. The way it changed when the lock gave way. Fear first, then confusion, then something else. Something like disbelief that help had actually shown up. When I walked into my apartment that night, Violet was on the couch with Peanut, eyes on the door like always. Hey, Bug, I said softly. You know how I told you today wasn't just about us? She nodded, cautious. There was another kid, I said. Someone like you. We got him out. She studied me for a long time, like she was measuring how much she could trust the word we. Did you kick the door? She asked. Yeah, I said. I did. Something relaxed in her shoulders. For the first time, the title of this whole nightmare felt less like a threat and more like a promise kept. For the first time in months, Violet slept through the night. No whimpers, no jolting awake, no shuffling feet in the hallway at 2 a.m. I lay on the couch outside her room, half awake, waiting for the usual cry that never came. When morning light finally slid under her door, it felt almost wrong. Like we'd stolen a good night from a universe that didn't hand them out for free. The next week became a blur of follow-up hearings and meetings. Ryder was locked up now, the DA stacking charges like sandbags, abuse, fraud, blackmail, obstruction. Harper was ordered into therapy and temporary supervised visits. I got what they called interim primary custody, which sounded clinical but felt like someone had quietly handed my heart back to me. The real twist came on a Tuesday. Morgan called, voice tight with that humming energy she got when something big had shifted. Harper wants to meet, she said. Without her attorney. With me present. She says she has something for you and the DA. If you'd told me a year earlier that my ex-wife asking to see me would make my stomach knot, I'd have laughed. Now it felt like being called into a briefing where they'd either hand you a medal or a body bag. We met in a neutral conference room at the courthouse. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, a pitcher of water nobody touched. Harper sat at one end of the table, hands folded so tight her knuckles were ghost white. She looked older, not in a year's way, in a weight way. Morgan sat beside me, legal pad ready but face unusually soft. You asked for this, she said to Harper. Go ahead. Harper didn't look at me at first. She spoke to the center of the table, voice low and rough. When I met Ryder, I thought he was salvation. Money, attention, someone who didn't resent that I had a kid. He said all the right things. Did all the right things. For a while. I stayed quiet. Anything I said now would shift the gravity. He started small, she continued. Comments about how you were never around. About how Violet needed consistency. Then he started paying bills. Just until you get back on your feet, he'd say. But every dollar he covered became a chain he wrapped around my neck. Harper finally lifted her eyes to mine. They were red-rimmed, hollowed out. He recorded everything, dumb, fights, drunk nights, times I yelled at Violet when I was exhausted, and he'd pushed every button I had. He'd replay them for me. Say, "You think any judge is going to give you custody if they see this? You're lucky I'm here." I'd imagine versions of this. None of them were this specific. After CPS got involved, she went on, he showed me something else. A clip he said he was saving in case you became a problem. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, opened a hidden folder, and slid it across the table. Morgan and I watched the screen. The clip was grainy, shot from outside my apartment window at night. From this angle, it looked like I was yanking Violet by the arm into the living room. Her face was turned away, my jaw was tight. Out of context, it looked bad, but I remembered that night. She'd been about to bolt into the parking lot after a stray cat, barefoot, with her cast still fresh. I grabbed her, pulled her back from the curb just as a car flew by. She'd cried because she was scared, not because I'd hurt her. 2 seconds later, I'd been kneeling, holding her, apologizing for scaring her. That part wasn't on the video. He told me, Harper whispered, that if I didn't back him up about the fall, he'd send this to CPS and say you were the abuser. That he'd testify he'd tried to warn them about you. He had other edits, too. Clipped audio. Bits of you raising your voice when we fought about money. Her lips trembled. He said between your record and those clips, he could make you disappear from her life and nobody would question it. Morgan leaned forward, eyes sharp. You kept this. I emailed a copy to myself the night before the hearing, Harper said. From his cloud. He was passed out. I think part of me knew this would all blow up. I just didn't know when I'd be brave enough to use it. Silence settled over the table. Heavy. Important. This was the second twist, and it hit harder than the first. The first had shown me who Ryder really was. The second showed me how close I'd come to being painted as him. One manipulated video, one scared ex-wife, one judge having a bad day. That's all it would have taken. Harper finally looked directly at me. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. I want you to know I'm done protecting him. Whatever it costs me. For the first time since this started, I believed her. Not because of the words, but because she'd brought evidence that could incriminate her too. It was a quiet kind of courage, late and imperfect, but courage all the same. And for Violet's sake, that mattered. The final hearing took place on a morning that felt colder than it should have been for late spring. Judge Adrian presided again, his face carved from the kind of exhaustion that comes from seeing too much human damage in one room. The courtroom was emptier this time. No Ryder, no jury, just the machinery of the law grinding towards something that looked like closure. The DA presented the evidence in clean, surgical lines. The video from Brooke, the medical records, the CPS investigation, Harper's testimony about the financial trap, the storage unit full of evidence showing Ryder's pattern stretching back more than a decade. Other victims, other broken arms in different towns. Nathaniel tried to argue that the edited video was unreliable, that Harper's testimony was suspect because she'd been complicit. He argued Violet's panic attack on the stand proved her credibility was compromised. He argued that without her testimony, the case was circumstantial. Judge Adrian listened with the expression of a man who'd already made up his mind. When Nathaniel finished, the judge leaned back and spoke directly to him. Counsel, I've been on this bench for 23 years. I've seen abusers come through here in custom suits, with good lawyers, with sympathetic stories. But I'll tell you what I know about men like your client. They leave trails. Multiple victims, multiple states, multiple complaints that somehow get settled or forgotten. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. Judge Adrian turned to face Ryder, who sat between two guards. Mr. Ryder, you have the right to allocate. Do you have anything to say? Ryder stood. The arrogance was gone now, replaced by something worse, calculation. He was still running the con, still trying angles. "Your Honor," he said, his voice practiced and smooth. "I understand I'm being painted as a villain here. But the truth is I was trying to help a struggling family. If I was overzealous in my discipline, I apologize. But I never intended. Discipline doesn't twist a child's arm into 4 fractures." Judge Adrian cut him off. "Discipline doesn't involve zip-tying a 7-year-old to a bed. And discipline doesn't require a storage unit full of blackmail material on the mothers you targeted." The judge picked up his paperwork. This was the moment. The sentencing. "On the charge of aggravated child abuse, I find you guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, guilty. On the charge of blackmail, guilty. On the charge of fraud and identity theft, the Financial Crimes Division will handle those. I'm sentencing you to 15 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole only after 12 years. Ryder's face went white. His lawyer was already reaching for appeal papers before the judge even finished. Additionally, Judge Adrian continued, looking directly at Ryder, "There is a protective order in place. You are not to contact the victims, their families, or any of the other parties in this case. Violation will result in immediate contempt charges. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down. A sound like a door slamming shut. Harper was crying. Not quietly, but full, body-shaking sobs. Morgan was already moving, filing papers, speaking urgently with the DA. I stood, still processing the fact that the man who'd broken my daughter's arm had just lost a third of his life in 4 words. Detective Logan found me in the hallway afterward. "It'll stick," he said. "Federal charges are harder to appeal. He's going away for a while." "And the other kids?" I asked. "Safe," he said. "Mothers are cooperating with the DA. We've got everything we need to keep him away from every one of them." Violet waited in the hallway outside the courtroom, small and exhausted and finally not looking over her shoulder. When she saw me, she didn't run, but she did something better. She walked straight to me and wrapped her arms around my waist, burying her face in my chest. "It's over," I told her, my hand on her hair. "He's gone." She didn't cry. She just held on tighter. The next 3 months were about the quiet things. Physical therapy for her arm. Therapy with Dr. Eliza for her mind. Nights without nightmares. Days where she could play outside without flinching at shadows. Harper got 90 days in a treatment facility for her role in covering up the abuse, plus mandated family counseling with Violet. She'd made a choice, a late one, an incomplete one, but a choice nonetheless to protect her daughter over protecting herself. The court recognized that. So did I. One Thursday, Harper came to pick up Violet for a supervised visit. Not at a center anymore. Morgan had petitioned for natural environment visits, and Judge Adrian had granted it. Harper looked healthier than I'd seen her in years. Thinner, but not from stress. From sleep. From carrying less weight. "How is she?" Harper asked quietly, watching Violet gather her things. "Better," I said. "Some days are still hard. But better." "I'm sorry," Harper said. Not for the first time, but this time it landed different. This time it sounded like she meant it. I nodded. I didn't say it's okay. Because it wasn't. It would never be okay that our daughter had had to learn fear from the person we'd invited into our family. But forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was a process, and Harper was in it. When Violet came out with her backpack, she hugged her mom naturally. No flinching, no fear. Harper cried a little, and Violet patted her back, small and protective. They were learning each other again from the beginning. As they left, Violet turned back and waved. I waved back. That night, I sat with the hospital paperwork, the CPS reports, the court documents. The physical proof that my daughter had been hurt, that I'd fought back, that the system, slowly, imperfectly, but ultimately, had worked. I thought about the boy in the apartment, the other children Ryder had touched, the mothers who'd been trapped in financial and psychological nets. And I thought about how close I'd come to being written off as a paranoid veteran, a bad ex-husband, unfit to raise my own child. One edited video. That's all it would have taken to flip everything. But Brooke had made a backup. Harper had finally broken. Detective Logan had kept looking. And Violet, terrified and small and broken, had drawn stick figures that told the truth on paper. Sometimes the system works. Not always. Not perfectly. But sometimes. I pulled out my phone and texted Morgan. Thank you. Her response came within seconds. That's what justice looks like when people actually do their jobs. You should be proud. I looked at the time. Almost midnight. I'd been sitting in this chair for 3 hours, holding ghosts. I turned off the lights and went to check on Violet one more time before bed. She was asleep, Peanut tucked under her arm, her breathing steady and even. No nightmares tonight. Probably no nightmares for weeks now. I stood in her doorway and let myself feel the thing I'd been holding at arm's length the entire time. Relief. Not happiness, because this whole chapter had been built on pain. But relief. The weight I'd been carrying had finally set down. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and the fight would still be there in memory. But tonight, my daughter was safe. That was enough. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of a house that actually felt like home. Not because of the walls or the roof, but because of the sound of Violet laughing in the backyard, high and clear, without that old edge of fear tucked underneath it. The house was small, a rental with creaky floors and a backyard that needed mowing more often than I remembered to do it. But the door had 3 locks I controlled. The windows opened without bars, and nobody inside had ever learned to flinch at footsteps in the hallway. Violet was teaching Peanut how to fly on the swing set I'd assembled from a box that claimed it only needed 2 hours and basic tools. It had taken me 6 hours and a lot of creative cursing, but watching her push that stuffed elephant into the air made every stripped screw worth it. Her arm had healed. Mostly. Dr. Felix said the bone was strong, but the muscle would always be a little weaker on that side. A permanent reminder she didn't need, because memories don't fade just because the bruises do. She still had nightmares sometimes. Still woke up some nights with her hand clutching that arm like it might break again. But now she came to my room, crawled into my bed, and let me hold her until the shaking stopped. That was new. That was trust rebuilding itself one terrified moment at a time. Harper came by every other Saturday for supervised visits. Not because the court demanded it anymore. Judge Adrian had lifted the supervision requirement after 6 months of clean reports, but because Harper asked for it. She said she needed the guardrails while she learned how to be a mom again without Ryder's voice in her head. The first few visits were stiff, all 3 of us sitting in the living room like strangers at a bus stop. But last week, Harper had brought a board game. One Violet used to love before Ryder said it was babyish. They'd played for 2 hours, and I'd heard Violet laugh at something Harper said. A real laugh, not the careful one she'd perfected for survival. Afterward, Harper had pulled me aside on the porch. "She's different with you," she said quietly. "Safer. I see it now. She's different because she's not being hurt." I replied, not unkindly. Harper had nodded, tears slipping down her face. "I know. I needed you to know I see it. And I'm sorry it took me so long to be brave enough to say it." That was the thing about bravery. It didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was just a woman handing over a phone full of evidence that could incriminate her too, because protecting her kid finally mattered more than protecting herself. Violet's therapy with Dr. Eliza was ongoing. They worked on something called narrative processing, basically helping Violet tell her own story in a way that made her the hero instead of the victim. Last session, Dr. Eliza had shown me a drawing Violet made. 3 figures holding hands, all smiling. The tall one was labeled Daddy. The medium one, Mommy. The small one, me. No shadows. No dark scribbles. Just a family that looked different than before, but was learning how to be whole again. I'd left the military 6 months ago. Not because they asked me to, but because I realized I couldn't be the father Violet needed if I was still deploying to places where I had to lock parts of myself away. I took a job training security teams for corporate offices, boring, predictable, home every night by 6. The pay was less, The purpose felt smaller. But when Violet ran to me after school with a story about her day, I understood that this was the mission that mattered now. One evening, she asked me a question I'd been waiting for. We were on the couch, her head on my shoulder, watching a movie she'd already seen 3 times. "Daddy," she said, "why did you kick down that door?" I thought about the boy in the apartment, about the other kids Ryder had touched, about how many doors in this world stay locked because nobody thinks they have the right to break them. "Because," I said, "sometimes the only way to save someone is to stop asking permission to help them." She was quiet for a long moment. "Would you do it again?" In a heartbeat. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to the movie. But I knew what she was really asking. Would you always be the person who shows up? The answer was yes. Always yes. The title of this story, "My ex-wife's boyfriend broke my daughter's arm in 4 places. Special Forces Dad kicked down the door," wasn't just a hook for viewers. It was a promise I made to myself in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and lies. A promise that I would be the kind of father who didn't wait for the system to work, who didn't accept excuses, who kicked down doors, literal and metaphorical, if that's what it took to keep my kids safe. But the real victory wasn't the kick. It wasn't even the arrest or the sentencing or the judge's words. The real victory was this moment. Violet asleep in her bed, door cracked open, breathing steady. Harper texting me to ask if she could take Violet to a movie next weekend. Me standing in a kitchen that smells like coffee and normalcy, knowing that tomorrow I'll wake up and the first thing I'll do is check on my daughter, and she'll be there, safe, whole, healing. So here's my question for you. Watching this story unfold from wherever you are, what would you have done if you were me? If you saw the bruises, heard the silence, felt the system turning against you, would you have trusted your gut? Would you have kicked down the door? Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. I want to know where my people are watching from. Are you in New York, Texas, California, or somewhere across the ocean? Drop it in the comments. And tell me, what kind of stories do you want next? Epic revenge thrillers? Emotional family battles? Stories where the quiet guy finally snaps? I read every single comment, and your suggestions shape what I write next. If you want more stories like this, where justice is slow but brutal, where fathers protect their daughters no matter the cost, where the bad guy gets what he deserves, then smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss the next thriller. The next story is already brewing. A tale of a man who lost everything and decided to take it back, one enemy at a time. It's tracking now, and when it drops, you'll want to be the first to see it. Thank you for watching, for listening, for believing that sometimes the good guys win, even if they have to kick down a door to do it.